good morning. Yang berusaha Puan Zainab binti Othman, Director of PKK. Yang berusaha Hajar Rafida binti Ahmad, Head of Department General Studies PKK. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning and may I have your attention please? We'd like to acknowledge the presence of our honorable guest, Dr. Malai Zeti Sheikh Abdul Hamid, with us in this virtual room for our second keynote session. A very good morning to Dr. Malai Zeti Sheikh Abdul Hamid and participants of International General Studies Conference, IGesCon2021. We meet again in the second day of IGesCon2021. So far, the conference has been extremely fruitful, and we hope to achieve even more on the final day. Before we proceed with the scheduled presentations for today, we are delighted to have a keynote address from a well-known figure in the field of general studies. I would like to invite Puan Darsina, my co-host today, to introduce the keynote speaker. How are you, Puan Darsina?
I'm fine, thank you, Christabel. Right, so let us begin. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is our honor to introduce our second keynote speaker, Dr. Malai Zeti Sheikh Abdul Hamid. Dr. Zeti has had the privilege of teaching over 1,500 students over a 28-year career in education since 1993. Her students have come from all education levels, including primary, secondary, O-levels, A-levels, diploma, bachelor, master's, and PhD. She is a specialist in language and literacy education, second language acquisition, communication studies, teacher training, and educational technology. Dr. Zeti currently holds numerous academic and research positions. She is Assistant Professor at the University Technology Brunei, Postdoctoral Fellow in Education at Harvard Graduate School of Education, and leader of the Wellness Research Trust at UTB, among other portfolios. She is highly active in community and volunteer work, including roles as ambassador of the United Kingdom Literacy Association, founder and curator of TEDx Bandar Seri Begawan, and president of the Reading and Literacy Association. Dr. Zeti is also the award recipient of the U.S. ASEAN Fulbright Scholarship from the J. William Fulbright Foreign Scholarship Board and the Bureau of Educational Cultural Affairs of the U.S. Department of State, USA, and the Chartered Teacher of English from the English Association, UK. Now, before we get to see what Dr. Zeti has to present us today, I would like to remind everyone that you are welcome to ask questions by posting it in the conversation space, and we will gladly read them to Dr. Zeti after her keynote. Thank you. Right, so without further ado, let us present to you Dr. Zeti's keynote entitled Teaching Creatively and Using Innovative Digital Devices as the New Norm.
Please welcome.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Yang berusaha, teknologis Zainab Othman, Director Politeknik Kota Kinabalu, Yang Berusaha Associate Professor Technologies, Dr. Sharifah Ruzaina Said Aris, Dean, Faculty of Education, University Technology Mara, the Management of Polytechnic Kota Kinabalu, the Management of Faculty of Education, University Technology Mara, the Management of Department of Polytechnic and Community College Education, IGesCon2021 participants, members of media, ladies and gentlemen. A very good morning and thank you for attending this keynote presentation by myself today, Dr. Malazeti, Assistant Professor, Center for Communication, Teaching and Learning at University Technology Brunei. Now, my keynote presentation today is entitled Teaching Creatively and Using Innovative Digital Devices as the New Tool. I will begin my presentation today by briefly touching on the current global crisis in education faced in the world due to the current situation of COVID-19 pandemic. I will then move on to outline digital resources and online teaching, challenges with online teaching, traditional teaching, and sharing new online platform for online learning. And before ending with some reflections on the effects and current situation of COVID-19 faced by the education sector of Brunei. To begin, let me start by saying that it is an unprecedented education crisis like the one caused by COVID-19 pandemic, that it is difficult to derive insights from the past due to that this is the first time that a major crisis has hit the world globally. But it helps for us to look outwards to see how other education systems are responding to similar challenges. Now, in terms of, for example, management and leadership, there are two forms of authority that are rooted in the distinction between certainty and uncertainty. And this can be related to Rittel and Weber's 1973 typology of the tame and wicked problems noted by Green 2000. See, while a tame problem may be complicated, but it is resolvable through unilinear acts and likely to have occurred before. So in other words, there is only a limited degree of uncertainty. Now, tame problems on one hand are solvable, like pieces of puzzle, for there is always an answer. But in Rittel's and Weber's distinction of a wicked problem, it is far more complex, very complicated, and to say the least. So the COVID-19 pandemic, being a wicked problem that we face, cannot simply be removed from its environment, it cannot be certainly solved quickly, and it cannot be returned without affecting the environment. Now, talking about the crisis in education, last year, 1.5 billion students in 188 countries were unable to attend school. Some of them were unable to go to schools with the assistance of alternative learning opportunities and, of course, support from their parents and teachers and, of course, educators. Now, the education crisis has exposed many inadequacies and inequalities in the school system that we face. Problems such as broadband connection, lack of computers, digital devices to assist with online education. So in this sense, there's every possibility that we will not return to the status quo or soon enough, or if ever things were ever to return to normal past this pandemic. Now, 1 year after the pandemic has passed, many primary and secondary schools are fully open in less than 40% of about 33 countries globally. But there are still consistent constraints for learning time, such as some countries having difficulty in making choices to open up schools. And of course, school learning is very important for the early years in that direct contact or face-to-face teaching with teachers and educators are generally preferred. So any kind of digital teaching alternatives are likely seen to be effective. At the primary level, for example, globally, some schools remain fully open in countries such as Chile, Colombia, Costa Rica, Korea, Switzerland, and Turkey from primary, secondary to tertiary education. But in some countries, which include Australia, Brazil, Denmark, Germany, England, Ireland, Netherlands, Poland, Portugal, schools were officially closed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So in this sense, some of the countries like this, their situation is of course different, okay? It differs from country to country, depending on the seriousness of the stark increase and the continued number of COVID-19 patients, which can rise from as little as tens to hundreds of thousands in a matter of weeks or days or months. Now, fortunately, in a country such as Brunei, The cases here were manageable during the first wave of the pandemic, which happened last year. And a year on, from the last locally infected case, which we had, was identified on the 7th of May, 2020. Okay, so for a period of more than 1 year, Brunei had enjoyed a blissful, normal life and resumed business as usual. But it was only after Brunei unfortunately hit a second wave of COVID-19 on 7th of August 2021, which is a few weeks ago, that the first new local cases, about 8, were identified within the community. And of course, this led to quickly immediate closure of schools, workplace, government agencies, both private and government sector. And of course, I will touch more on the mitigation strategies implemented by Brunei after the first week of the pandemic towards the end of my presentation. Now, let me move on to the next point of my presentation today, talking about use of digital resources. So here, I'll touch back on the closure of school. Now, during school closures, digital resources has become for education. So teachers and students alike had to quickly adapt to teach and learn online. Now, virtually all countries have rapidly enhanced digital learning opportunities for both students and teachers, and we're encouraged to form new forms of collaboration. So online platform became expensive for all levels of education, from primary, secondary to tertiary. Now, the difference now is that mobile phones and digital devices are now more common everywhere, and there is always home learning packages and other kind of platforms which are now commonly used in schools globally. But you see, if we move beyond the pandemic, it is also important for us to actually continue moving or continue to monitor teaching and to address the needs of different students and to expand opportunities for quality education. The pandemic has also complicated the administration of perhaps national examinations and assessments. So education system have to change the calendar, the content, the mode of examination, assessment. And these are the things that we have to adapt to in the new era. I mean, this is what we call the new norm now. So it's no longer the past. This is what we're talking about, the new norm. All right. So some institutions have even implemented or resorted to perhaps 100% assessment, and everything's done online. Can you imagine now the world is so changed? Who would expect that now, this year on 2021, everything has changed our life? We're now doing things so much online. Now, the transition to remote instruction and the subsequent reopening of schools, of course, had a profound impact on teachers' work. Now, this crisis required many teachers to acquire new skills and to prepare materials suited to virtual environments. And in some cases, of course, there are new responsibilities to our work. There's increased interaction with parents. We have to increase our remedial classes, either mostly online. And of course, we have to implement new administrative health and safety procedures. So the transition to online is difficult for those who are not familiar with online learning, especially online learning format, okay? So teacher engagement in online professional development is really, really important now, because prior to COVID-19, the pandemic, teachers were probably less likely, to keep up to date with new products, new services, new innovations, new technologies. So these are the things that we're not used to. But since 2019 and when the pandemic arrived, I think in school, most countries were able to actually mobilize additional resources during pandemic, and governments often help with funding, okay? So we also talk about what are some of the challenges we face, okay? So in this case, we also have to mention, that in terms of mobilizing support for innovation, resilience, and change, particularly in the current state, there are a lot of uncertainty created by the wicked problems arising from the current predicament that we face. So educators and as well as the education system needs to be better at communicating and for building support to change through innovation. And one of the ways to maintain safety for everyone is, of course, through online learning platforms. Now, many teachers and educators are probably born like me. We were born as digital immigrants, and we're not digital natives, not like the young people these days, yeah? We have not been, you could say, well equipped to be proficient users of new technologies. So it is vital that we as educators to become as active agents for change. So this means that we have to implement technological and social innovations, and perhaps to become an ad hoc education designer and practitioner. And we can do this via new various teaching platforms. In fact, some of them are not really new. They have been around for some time. We never realized the need to use these platforms, okay? And I'll tell you more later on. Because this will allow more efficient transmission of knowledge of education to students. So globally, many countries are now able to keep schools open, of course, as long as we keep social distancing and, of course, hygienic practices. So now, in light of this discussion, okay, let me bring to you the next part of my presentation. So before we go on to talk about what are the innovative ways to teach in light of the new norm, can we look at some differences between traditional and online teaching? So some comparison might be good. We can talk about how the methods and teaching tools have changed as well, and how more communication tools are now used for teaching. So if you look at this comparison, if you think about it, right? Traditional teaching, we have a lot of chalk and talk. We write on the whiteboard, we talk to our students, and of course, there's live broadcast. The good thing is that we're doing it face-to-face, and this is what happens in traditional teaching when we meet our students live. I mean, you and me are seeing them live in a classroom normally, not virtually live. But comes the virtual video conferencing, we have as well live broadcast, but it's not face-to-face. We don't see them. We don't see them right in front of us. We lose the human essence of the touch, And on the other hand, we also have to talk about learning management system, because this will vary, of course, yeah? In terms of also traditional teaching, okay, there's no recording. Everything is live. Whereas various video conferencing techniques, definitely live. We can actually record our teaching and we can play back for our students. And any kind of learning management will also vary. Resources, in terms of traditional teaching, we are the resource, we are the human factor. Whereas video conferencing, it gives you the idea it's not real. Many of my students complain they don't feel real, they don't feel talking to a computer facing is right. But then again, that is what it is with online teaching, yeah? And with learning management, it's the same thing. And the good thing is that certain things like learning management system, like LMS, we have a space to store our work, store the students' work, and we can give written feedback in due course, okay? So briefly, this is some of the traditional versus online teaching that we've gone through the past years. So now move on to my next part of the slide. Okay. So I think the slide's not, that's a little problem. Okay. All right, so for this one here, let me touch on very briefly some of the more perhaps common platforms for video conferencing that we use nowadays. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with Zoom, Microsoft Teams, Google Classroom, and of course WebEx. So these are the things that we are all very familiar with, Let me read to you what is happening in Brunei. In Brunei, these 4 platforms are actually being shared across in Brunei. In fact, it's been officially put in as some of the learning platforms that can be used for teaching in Brunei. All right. So referring to Brunei, we are very specific to a point that we are given Zoom safety guidelines, Microsoft Teams safety guidelines. We are even given Google Classroom safety guidelines and WebEx safety guidelines. Now these guidelines have been provided by the government, and this has been translated to Telegram. So in Brunei, one of the unique things that they have done is that they've opened up Telegram for the society in Brunei, and we can subscribe to Telegram, and all this information have been shared openly in this kind of platform, and that never used to exist before. If you think about it, WhatsApp and even Telegram were never in existence, although we used to using WhatsApp, but we never realized that WhatsApp can be used for more than just for calling. Now it's seen as a tool, and I'll touch more about this later on. Okay, just a quick example. When I was teaching my students, we do a lot of Zoom conferencing, for teaching, and you can see some pictures of me and my student. And I always tell them, when you are in a classroom, you have to treat this as real as possible. This is an environment which is virtual, but in any normal classroom, I will still see you and you'll still see me. And these are the things that we are still doing now, and we'll continue doing, and we might do this for the next couple of months, couple of years. So we don't know what's going to happen. But for this reason, we need to be updated. We need to know how and what to use to help assist our students in the current state. So one of the other things I mentioned earlier on is another learning management system. So in my university and in Brunei, there are several learning management systems that we actively use. For my case, for my university, we actually use Moodle. So Moodle is a learning management system that has been used. And for Moodle, I find it is probably more convenient because you can share information to your students. Assignments can be sent up, can be easily shared. It's like, to me, it's an online course on its own. So students can work at their own pace. So that is probably the biggest advantage of having a proper learning management system, but in the provision that you know how to use it. So this means that it goes back and falls back to us as educators. We must try to be more updated. We have to learn what are these new tools and technologies that never existed before. If you think about it, to go back to Zoom. Zoom used to be used only for meetings, and that's what we used to do it for. Even Microsoft Teams, for example, they were used specifically for meetings. But you notice now, it has been moved to be used into the education system, into online teaching. So what used to be in the past specifically concentrating only for meetings, it has now been used for us for online teaching. And we never expected that to happen, that it could be useful for us now as educators. So, like I said, I like Moodle because, Moodle is user-friendly. With Moodle, you can give tasks to your students, you can prepare posters, you can do assignments. Lots of advantages of using this kind of tool for your teaching. Okay, but apart from that, let me just also share with you, there are of course other learning tools, for example, other learning teaching platforms that are actually actively used in Brunei. Now, what I did was recently, I sent out a survey to a lot of my colleagues, my friends in Brunei, and a small research that we did, where a lot of teachers participating in a survey. And these are some of the things they came up with, how they use assessment tools and resources, or sharing resources to their students. Interestingly, they use Google Forms and documents, Kahoot, Slido, quizzes, even screenshot on WhatsApp, Google Classroom, emails, and photos. These are some of the assessment tools to assess the teaching between the students and the teachers. And this is from primary, secondary, up to tertiary. So for tertiary, I think we're more relevant to have the higher tools. So for lower levels are more towards the simpler ones. But for higher education level, these kind of tools like Classroom, Teams, Zoom, Canvas, Moodle, WebEx, and Moodle. So these types of platforms are probably more useful for higher education, and these are the most common ones that I found in my research with my colleagues here in Brunei and how they use these teaching platforms to teach. Now moving on, I would say that there's a new thing that something that I would like to share interesting me as well in the context of Brunei. So I think the difference with Brunei is Brunei, we live in a particular culture where the society is very, very small. And you might wonder, how is WhatsApp used perhaps in Brunei? So if you were to ask that question to any Bruneian, any educator, any student, they will tell you that we use WhatsApp a lot in Brunei, especially during this pandemic. Okay, and I'll tell you the reason why. So this is a very different thing that I like to share in the terms of education in Brunei. Because you see, some Bruneians, generally have access to internet, Wi-Fi connection. But the difference is that WhatsApp, they're used to using WhatsApp for communication, for phone calls, for text messaging. And we have been using this platform, I won't say platform, this experience for communicating for a long time. But this has been going, and we're used to it. That is a sure thing. So WhatsApp has been there around. But come new technologies, Zoom and all these technologies and Microsoft Teams, these are things that we're not familiar with. On the other hand, we have WhatsApp. We used to communicate easily. So in Brunei, because almost everyone here uses WhatsApp widely, this sort of became a very, very important platform to teach in Brunei. And many of the teachers that I spoke to in my survey said the same thing. They said, look, WhatsApp is the best way for us to teach, especially during these past months, during the pandemic. Interesting, isn't it? So, like I said, very interesting how we can share this. And okay, there are many things that you can do, but of course I'm not going into detail, but some of the things that we can do. Okay. Now, I'm very mindful of the time. So, as far as I'm concerned, I would say that we've been going through a very new and unexpected turmoil of having a second wave in Brunei. So now going on to the end of my presentation, I just like to share with you a quick recap, what's happened here, for example, in Brunei. So more recently, on the 9th of August, there has been a change in terms of the school terms and holidays, just recently. And because of the change, this was implemented by the government here. 10th of August was declared to have fully online teaching for schools and institutions across Brunei. That means that by the 14th of August, there was another decree by the government here that everyone, as much as possible, to work from home. So we use any business continuity plan for both the government and the private sector that we are likely and hopefully for now need to work from home, because we need to make sure we try to mitigate the situation and try to keep the rates down. Okay, so 14th of August has been recently the policy. So many of us, educators, teachers, are now spending so much time staring at the computers, preparing online materials, preparing teaching, having online classes, and this is generally for every teacher, every student are all now online. Okay, and recently on the 14th of August, the first control measures and restrictions were implemented for all Bruneians to work from home. And then having completed that, second wave came. We're still not doing well. Now the government has decided to continue the next one, the second control measures and restriction implementation for all Bruneians to continue up to the 3rd of October 2021. So these are the recent changes that we have to do in light of the current situation. So what Brunei is doing to mitigate the situation, and this means that for now, Bruneians at the moment are going fully online from every level, from